Okay, hello, I'm Lisa, an artist, 2D animator, and Chica Umino stan.
Hello, I'm Winnie, an illustrator, designer, and old man lover.
Welcome to Heart to Hato,
a podcast where two friends have a heart-to-heart about anime. Okay, Lisa, I need to put this front and center before anything else. I almost could not contain my laughter when I said my intro. I need to make it clear to everyone that I don't just love old men. I love old man characters in anime because I don't think they're often explored and there's just something really charming about them. Please do not DM me if you're an old man and you want me to date you or something. That is not what this is about. But
Winnie just has the most problematic intro statements. First it was Elon Musk and now it's old men.
Listen, Lisa, you're the intelligent, really well thought out, coherent one. I need to balance that out with some horrible, chaotic energy. But, you know, like the statement from last week, this week, my intro is also very relevant to the content. We'll get there. But anyway, this is the Sangatsu no Lion episode, or March Comes In Like a Lion, and Lisa and I have honestly been putting this off a little bit because we both adore this show so much, to the point that I think a part of us was unsure if we could do it justice, and we said, literally the name of our podcast is Heart to Hato. Let's just speak honestly from our heart and just be as honest as we can about why this show is one of our favorites. It is
I want to be totally transparent. This is an immense behemoth of a show that is so remarkably dense. It is really difficult to try and cram it all into one episode, and I don't think we can.
Yeah, so this might be a two-parter. We're going to keep track of the time and just check in with each other as this goes, but it probably is the densest thing that we've discussed so far. Also in part because it's so in line with what we tend to look for in shows, so we have more to say about it. But with that out of the way, I'm going to introduce the show with a bit of a log line. So, Sangatsu no Lion, or March Comes In Like a Lion, is about a 17-year-old professional shogi player who sets out to live his life independent of his adoptive family. He meets many influential forces in the shogi community and the Kawamoto family, which help him to work through complex emotions throughout the series. And the anime so far has 2 seasons. We will be discussing both with spoilers. I hope there's a third one day, but as it stands, only 2.
Right. And I think generally our conversation will be centered around the second season of the series, just because I think there's a little bit more to discuss there. Season 1 is kind of a large build-up to that.
Mm-hmm. Season 1 is at times... I say this as somebody who adores this show. It can be a bit boring at times, but it's sort of like the more blander setup to get you to an immense payoff. So overall, I do not fault season 1 for not being the most exciting thing ever.
Absolutely. And I do think that kind of relays into our next topic, which is where I'm going to be discussing Chica Umino, the original creator and the mangaka of Sangatsu. And it might speak to her confidence tackling this series initially. She is this incredible female mangaka. She kickstarted her career in the early 2000s with the series Honey and Clover, award-winning manga. It was fluffy. It's this light piece about university students, and it's sort of a strange change for her to go from that series into Sangatsu. She discussed about how she was a little bit nervous going into her next series. She was like, well, if I have this light feeling in my second piece, maybe if it fails, people are going to see me as like a one-hit wonder. And I'm going to tackle this really stiff, serious subject of shogi. If I fail at that, maybe audience will see that maybe I just rushed into this genre too hard and I need a third chance and I'll work on my third work and it's going to be perfect. So it's funny, she had that sense of insecurity, whereas March Comes In Like a Lion is this masterpiece. And it's a little boring at first, but I think it's just maybe her growing confidence in her own story. But Chica Umino, she is this incredible freaking mangaka. Her work, like her visual style, is this fluffy, watercolory, pastel. Nobody can draw a character's smile like she can, and it translates so well into the serious story where Sangatsu is so stiff at times, and then it's so uplifted by the Kawamotos and the way that she draws their smiles and their environments. But anyway, sorry to go on that tangent. I wanted to mention that she's also hugely inspired by children's narratives like Anne of Green Gables and Heidi. She loves this concept of an atypical family, which is definitely woven into Sangatsu's fabric. It inspires her current work, and even just mundane scenes that she recalls in Anne of Green Gables where they talk about food and cooking. You definitely see that in Sangatsu as well, where they talk about wagashi or the things that the Kawamoto family are making. I'm like out of breath. I'm so nervous discussing Chica Umino. I'm so sorry.
We're like, do we have the right to utter the master's name from our lips?
Her name.
Excuse me.
But I wanted to talk about her relationship with the anime adaptation and her relationship with the director at SHAFT, Akiyuki Shimbo. So, full disclosure, their interview is online and it's translated into English, but there's some nuances that I might not understand or that's mistranslated, so just a heads up that it might not be entirely accurate, but Umino seems like a huge fan of pretty much everyone she interacts with. She is so unbearably sweet. I love her to death. She talks about working with Bump of Chicken, the artists of the opening. She just mentions how she's a huge fan of them and they're a huge fan of her. She talks about working with Shimbo where she's a huge fan of him and he's a huge fan of her. And it's just this dynamic that she carries around each interview that makes her collaboration so successful every time. But Umino, working with Shimbo, the director of Sangatsu, she mentions that she loves his work with Bakemonogatari, Madoka, and so many other SHAFT projects. She knows, like, the work that he's done, and she celebrates that every time she talks about him. And when she discusses the adaptation of March Comes In With a Lion, like a lion, there's this direct quote by her that says, "I want it done by Shimbo Kantoku and SHAFT. If this dream doesn't happen, it doesn't need to be adapted." So she has this like really strong statement of like, if it's not by him, I don't want it. And I love that for her. I just love like the determination of that. And shortly after she made that comment, she was sort of like, oh, I hope I didn't push anyone into a corner or anything, but I love that she knows what she wants out of this adaptation, and I love that she's a fan and that she kind of laid down this demand and it worked out for her.
All or nothing mentality.
Literally like a girl boss move.
I was gonna say that's a girl boss. That is. Honestly, like learning more about Umino Chika, I get closer and closer to thinking she might be my favorite mangaka as a person. Like, she's just, is she even a real human? She sounds unreal. She's just so sweet and enthusiastic, and where her work comes from is such an honest and heartfelt place. It can be seen at every step of the process.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think her personality bleeds out into her work, and that's what makes it so endearing. But anyways, she kind of expressed worry that Shimbo, the director, he's just this incredible beast on his own. Bakemonogatari is another one of my favorites, and he has this incredible, distinct style, and she was worried that Sangatsu might be a stiffer story for him to adapt, and she was concerned that he might not be able to bring out his full style with her story. And she sort of expressed the difference between her and Shimbo when they were discussing Rei as a character and his feelings. She's sort of mindful of Rei as an artist while drawing him as if he was a real person. So she's tempted to give him visual space when he's experiencing emotions like embarrassment or frustration. And she sort of describes it as a gender dynamic where she, as a woman, feels like it's a nice thing to do for a young boy and his ego to give him some space if he's feeling a little bit embarrassed or frustrated, rather than getting in his face visually with like the hypothetical camera. Whereas Shimbo is like, well, I want to focus on those moments of high intensity. I want to do close-ups on him, and she feels bad if she does that. She's like, oh, that's my son. And she attributes that to maybe this is the cruelty of a male director for him wanting to get up in his business, which I thought was really funny.
That is a very, very interesting point brought up. And now that I know that, I'm thinking about the 2 seasons I've watched, and I can actually pinpoint examples of both things happening. So maybe they did reach a compromise, like when sometimes we are getting up in Rei's business and showing his full frustration and embarrassment. Other times he does get some space. Like, I actually remember both of those visual things happening on screen.
Right. I think it speaks to a really strong relationship between the two, that they were able to create this really incredible work of animation. Their interview reads as a real friendship while reading it, and I find it so charming. Like, she goes into this tangent about how she was so nervous to meet this guy, and when she met him, he was a little bit stiff towards her. He was very serious, like professionally. And then they go out to supper and he gets really drunk, and she's like, actually, he's a really friendly guy. You know, we got along really well. I was like, that is just so fun and funny. And I love like behind the scenes things like that, because it will ultimately usually translate really well into a final collaborative project.
Absolutely. Like, the sort of real connection they have as friends, it seems, is evident by the final produced product. Like, what we see feels so genuine on screen, and I think that must be at least in part a reflection of their true camaraderie.
Right. I mean, that was pretty much it as far as what I wanted to discuss about Chica Umino personally, but there's so much going online. If you search up her interviews with other mangaka, she is incredibly supportive, and I value that so much. I value her positivity, her willingness to engage with so many different types of art, with anime, with manga, with everything. She sees the humans behind it and she wants to interact with them. And I worship her for that, because that's exactly what I would like to enact. You know, I would love to engage with work and then engage with the people behind the work. And so much respect to her. Love her.
She's an art hype man. Like, she's so sweet. How could you not love her?
Umino sensei.
Sensei. we simp very hard for her in this corner.
Yes. So like one last thing that I kind of wanted to talk about was Shimbo's directorial sense. He described splitting up the Sangatsu world into a triangle, which is very interesting to me. So, Shimbo, with his work in Monogatari, he was able to be freer, where he was able to create these like really abstract, crazy like 3D worlds. Whereas, of course, he's adapting from a visual medium such as the manga in Sangatsu. He has these environments to work with, but he was able to visualize splitting up these areas into 3 main sections: Rei's room, which is supposed to reflect his introversion; the Shogi Hall, which is his battlefield; and then the Kawamoto family home, which will always have this very fluffy feeling. So he separates these 3 areas into like 3 visually distinct places, and he's able to sort of implement his own sense of like color or I don't know, stuff like that.
Wow, that's very interesting. And when hearing you bring that up, again, I'm reflecting on the series, and all I can say is that was very evident. That it was very clear, the artistic direction in that. I don't think it can easily go over viewers' heads. every time we enter such spaces, there is a completely different emotional aura and atmosphere, and the visual treatment, how it's depicted artistically, is it contrasts as well to really push that narrative. And it just goes to show you how much thought was put behind this production. This is not your average, we copied the panels from the manga and put it on the screen adaptation. Like, they really made their own with this anime, and it's honestly, I don't say this lightly, it is phenomenal. It is absolutely a masterpiece.
Right, and I hate to be that person because there's so many memes online about Shaft fanboys. Shaft fanboys think that Shaft is the best anime studio ever. I am a Shaft fangirl. I think they have incredible visual experimentation. I think they do so much with the work that they're given. And you know what? I don't care if I'm a generic Shaft fangirl. I will take that title because they're doing some really cool stuff with the mediums that they're given.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you, even without being a Shaft fangirl, mostly for the reason that I haven't seen that much of their other things. But if Sangatsu is any indication of their capabilities, I've really high hopes and expectations for other things coming from them. But sort of with all of that kind of a little bit of production backstory out of the way, do we want to go into the meat of the anime now? The story, the characters, the visuals.
Absolutely. I don't even know where to start.
I know. I was like, how do I gently push this to Lisa? Because we have talked a lot before starting this episode, mostly containing screams from both of us about how to put together the structure of this episode, because there's just so much to discuss. And also, like, everything connects to everything. Like, when I was looking at my notes about about specific characters, I'm like, oh wait, but this specific character also has a thing going on with 5 other characters. How do I talk about them without jumping back and forth? Well.
I know. It's the way that the characters are woven into each other it's what makes tackling this very, very difficult. But you know what? Let's just start with the notes. Let's start with the notes. Yeah. Winnie, why do you love old men?
All right, yeah, that is where we are starting. Listen, Sangatsu no Lion is like I said earlier, it's phenomenal for so many reasons, and one of those is definitely characterization and character development for me. Almost no one in this entire series is a meaningless side character. There's intriguing backstories for basically everyone, even if it seems they're only passing for a few episodes. And they all feel, as a consequence, they all feel like real people who have lived their own complex lives full of unique experiences. And with that being said, Sangatsu no Lion is specifically great because there is such a variety of old men characters, and that is rarely, you're laughing, Lisa, but listen, that is rarely explored. That is rarely explored with such depth. We don't see that kind of perspective usually in characters in our media, especially anime. I think what I am so used to seeing sort of older characters in anime, usually as like the grumpy old man, your grandpa, like, you know, like the grandpa from here's a good example, Wolf Children. He's like kind of angry and maybe helps you a little bit, helps Hannah with the farming, or it's like a really sweet grandma, and that's kind of it. Those are kind of 2 options, and it stops there. But with Sangatsu,
they serve to be like a guiding force, but not a real human.
Right.
You know?
They seem kind of like caricatures, like because they've passed a certain age, they're surely not interesting anymore. You're just an old crusty 70-year-old. Why would we want to know about you? And in Sangatsu, there's such a bountiful variety, Lisa. And who better to start off talking about than Shimada? The person I simp harder for than probably anyone else. Listen, Shimada has hollowed out cheeks. He has a chronic stomach condition. He kind of looks like he's 2 seconds away from death 80% of the time. But he is the sexiest anime character of late that I can name. I am being 100% serious. The night before,
he's just a cool guy. Like, cool he has cool guy energy, and that transcends any age.
Okay, I'm gonna talk about like actual significant stuff, but to get me off the simp train, I'll just leave you guys with this. The night before his final match with Soya, who is within the Sangatsu world, the king, the master, like the monster of shogi, Shimada's been up against him with like a 4-0 losing streak, and it closes that scene with you get a 3/4 view, his head leaning against the window as the moonlight cascades over him before this eventful tournament match, and he just smirks and says, "I'm not going down without a fight." And I was like, Shimada, why are you so cool?
You're so cool. Shimada.
Okay, but to go a little bit into like who he is, why is Shimada where he is in his life? His backstory is full of ups and downs. He comes from a really small little village, and he carries the hopes and dreams of that entire town, which is mostly full of older people, older men, and sort of carrying those aspirations on his shoulders in the context of Shimada explores the complexity and thin line between motivation and suffocation. And again, that arc with Soya, I remember distinctly a very poignant moment on screen where he's asking which one is the real nightmare. And he's comparing this dream that flashes before him, wondering like what life he would be living had he chose more ordinary pleasures, like marrying a nice girl and having a family, which also humanizes the shogi players in our eyes a bit more too, because we're seeing so much throughout the series of them being consumed by shogi, but they're still humans. It's not that these people have never considered a path that might have been, quote unquote, more typical. But the thing is, for a professional aiming to become a master at this craft, those ordinary desires cannot just be a mere passing fantasy. They're considered a distraction or like a haunting temptation that they have to aggressively battle to reject every day. Otherwise, if they become a chance to threaten winning and moving on to play in, for Shimada specifically, the hometown, which he deeply loves. I don't know if I did a great job really conveying how much his motivation and love is tied to the town he comes from. He is their pride and joy. He is upheld by the people there as like, I don't know, I think almost a pseudo god. And with the arc with Soya, the big thing was, winning against such a master would be amazing. But had he moved on to the final stage, he would have been able to play one of the matches in his hometown, and that is why it was so significant. Now, although he overcame such a struggle to kind of get where he is, the aim was not attained. He does suffer like this overwhelming loss to Soya, 4-0, like not a single win, and it makes the audience wonder if it was worth the sacrifice. And to us, probably not, but for someone who loves shogi as much as Shimada does, we get the sense that no regret would have been greater than him not pursuing it. And, I hate to say this because I'm saying all of this, really heartbreaking defeat to Soya. Later on in season 2, it happens again with Sak-chan. Like, Shimada just does not get a win. And I was thinking about that, like, oh no, he's just there. Umino Sensei's just beating my beautiful boy to the ground, but that's actually not how I felt throughout the series, Lisa. Like, I didn't feel like they were just making Shimada tragic for no reason. What I see as one of the defining things in his whole arc is that he is reconciling the path of which he was born, that he was almost seen like he was seen as a prodigy. I just love Shimada so much, guys. I'm tripping over my words. He's seen
tongue-tied.
Seen as a prodigy in the eyes of the people from the village. And he's reconciling that now as an adult, he's not the rising star as some other people are, like Soya is or Rei. And he's accepting this truth. And to me, I think we experience so many narratives that portray this idea of if you work hard enough, you can overcome anything and achieve anything, and you can be the best. But the reality in Sangatsu is there are some people destined for greatness that you might never be able to reach no matter how hard you work, but it's still up to you to decide if the path is still worthy of your time and passion and to pursue it. And Shimada is a great character showing us that yes, even if he does not overcome someone like Soya and become the most legendary person in shogi, that's not enough to make him give up. He still loves shogi. He still has a passion that fires him, that he drives him to get better every day, even if the ending is not going to be that fairy tale ending. And there's something absolutely beautiful and so touching about that kind of honesty to me, Lisa. It's just, it's so genuine and just, Shimada.
I wanted to interject and say how impactful his introduction into the anime was. The way that Rei is so single-handedly focused on this game with Shimada that he doesn't even look up at his opponent. He's just looking on to move on to the next stage. This is just a barrier for him to cross until the barrier stops him and Shimada wins. And then he finally looks up and he sees Shimada for who he is, a significant character that is about to be part of his story. And I feel as though no other anime or manga would give Shimada a spotlight like Sangatsu has. He would just be like a source of guidance or an opponent for Rei to defeat. But he's a main character in his own right. He has conflicts in his own right. He has this massive chip on his shoulder that many of the older shogi players in the show have, and it's very important to depict these older figures within the shogi scene because they are the masters, because they have so much experience with shogi, because they have so much riding on their shoulders. And I feel like that translates really well into Saku-chan's arc.
Yes, it does. But before I go on to that, I am glad that you brought up Shimada's relationship with Rei, because one of the things that I think actually ties in really well for both Shimada and Rei's overall arc is when they formed that sort of mentorship and apprentice relationship. Like, to me, another thing that drives home the point that even though Shimada has lost some really significant battles in his shogi career, think about the honest joy of, taking on someone like Rei, and Rei takes care of him when he's suffering the chronic stomach pains, and there's this genuine, real connection between the two of them as friends. And I don't know, do you think that just because he kept losing in shogi that those sort of things don't have worth as well? There's still so many things that are vibrant and happening in his life, even if something big such as getting to the ultimate level he wants in shogi has not been attained yet. I think that's really beautiful. But yes, the next person I want to talk about is Saku-chan, because he does have a similar arc to Shimada. And spoiler alert, Saku-chan is the second person to beat Shimada in one of the big shogi battle highlights in the series. And they did it in a way where I was actually not even that upset that my favorite character lost to him, because of how much they gave us from Saku-chan's perspective, that you really felt for him. You wanted to cheer for both of them. But yes, so to kind of backtrack a little bit, who is this old man? And when we say old man, Saku-chan is an old man. Lisa, that guy does not have a single black hair on his head anymore. That is a field of snow.
Shimada is in his 30s. I know we give him flack for being an old man. I think it's just because he's in poor health. He's not that old.
Yeah, Shimada gives off older energy than he actually is. And Sakuchan kind of gives off younger energy. Like, when we're first introduced to him in the anime, he's this sort of playful guy who is always nagging and won't stop complaining. And I think Umino-sensei definitely meant to do that in a way to kind of surprise us, because no one would have thought that we'd care about him given our first introduction. He's just, okay, griping boomer. But Umino Sensei really establishes this incredible burden for Sakuchan and what he must go through to achieve immortality within shogi. And if we thought there was already so much on the shoulders of Shimada, Sakuchan shows us an angle of that heightened 10 times. He's chasing this eternal title within the shogi world, and similar to Shimada, he's carrying the hopes and dreams, but for Sakuchan, it's of friends, of mentors, of peers, of all the people surrounding him and his entire shogi career who have fell away just like seemingly eons ago. And Sakuchan is slowly losing a battle against the merciless ravages of time. And if we're going to, bring it back to one of the most amazing aspects of the show, the visual language and metaphors, Sakuchan's arc is depicted spectacularly when we see him shown isolated in a burning field. And that is when he decides that he shall fight to the ashes for this. This just absolutely, it left me speechless, honestly, of this depiction of white ribbons representing the people rallying behind him. And at once, these ribbons are his burden, yet it's also the final push for him to achieve greatness. And more than that, he's motivated by this intense burning passion inside. And like, similarly to what I thought was that really poignant about Shimada's arc that stuck with me, Sakuchan is yet another character that shows you that others can't make you want something, ultimately. You have to be the person to want the thing that you're chasing. And that's, I think, part of the reason that helped push him that final stretch and beat Shimada. And yeah, I was like, Shimada's my favorite boy, but I kind of didn't feel that heartbroken that he lost. Like, there was so much riding for Sakuchan's arc that it culminated in such a cathartic win for him. And even all of the old men from Shimada's town, I don't know if you'll remember, Lisa, they showed up at the Shogi Hall and were beaming with joy, like, oh, our little prodigal son, he went up against Sakuchan, and Sakuchan's an absolute legend for our age group, and he won. He is an eternal shogi master now. I don't know.
Tearjerker right there.
Absolutely.
Honestly. I if I can jump in and just highlight again, the visual metaphor of Sakuchan's art shocked me. It gave me chills. Like, the adaptation of Umino's, I assume that she had drawn that, but then putting it into animation, just so beautiful. And if you think about the metaphors linked to Saku in comparison to Rei, Rei is so often shown as surrounded by water, and he's being sort of buried by water and pushed over by waves of water, sort of depicting the expectations placed on him as a young shogi prodigy. Whereas Saku, he's an older man that's sort of running out of time. He's burning. Like, shogi has an intense physical cost on the player, and especially for an older man like him, like, it's taking time out of his life, his precious life, and strain out of his energy that he has left. It's like burning him and eating him alive to keep playing this game. But he still has that spark for it, even more so than even before, because he's carrying all of these people's weight, this massive boulder on his shoulder. It's just, it's incredible. I love it. I just love it.
Yeah, I remember when I had finished watching that arc, the first thing I did was DM Lisa and go, yo, those white ribbons? Those white, like, absolutely masterful depiction of like the weight of anxiety and the ambitions and motivations of these characters translated into something so non-obvious but still gets across the message completely. I don't know how Shaft does it. Like they got a engorged brain behind the scenes. It's just absolutely amazing.
I mean, really, it's just the initial seed planted by Umino sensei, and then Shimbo takes it. He also mentioned that Shimbo, there's like an incredible background designer on the Sangatsu team. Like, he was like, this guy is a genius. So I wish I had his name, but he contributes so much to the mood of the series, I feel, and so an arc like that especially, you know, the layout design, oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah. I'm looking at my list of old men and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of old men here. Next up on the line, which I think is actually a great sort of tangent that I'd love to go on, because I know you and I are both itching to talk about, is Hina's arc. But I wanted to highlight, like, actually one of my favorite parts of that arc was Grandpa Kawamoto's response when he found out that Hina had been bullied. I think that was one of the moments of the entire series that made me sob just unwittingly. I
can't even think about it. I have tears coming through.
I'm like, okay, we're going to have to do a bit of backtracking. This is what I'm saying. Like, when we have so many things to say, we're like, how do we do it in a way that, like, chronologically makes sense?
I just want to say, it's so funny we're starting off with the list of old men rather than Rei, the main character in the Kawamoto family, who are also the main characters. Hello? You know what? I feel like this episode, let's just make this the old man episode, and then we can go into, like, the main character episode.
Listen, this happened because Lisa was spoiling me, but it's not because I have anything less to say about the day and the Kawamoto family. Like, I feel like me simping over the old man is almost kind of a meme. I enjoy it because it's something unexpected, but boy, could I talk about hours about Rei's characterization and his entire backstory and
the old men are just such an incredible part of the series that make it so freaking unique. Like,
they're main characters.
If this was any other show, like, these would all be teenagers, and he'd be a teenager facing off of other teenagers in shogi. But you know what? This is a sport that is dominated by an older generation, and it is great that Umino Sensei is giving these older characters conflict and personality and something they're so often not afforded in other shows. And it's just it's great, and it's exciting, and it makes me excited for the future, because I know that even when I get older, there's still going to be, well, I guess this isn't something I should be excited for, but like, older people still have passion, they still have conflict, they still have, you know, goals that they want to fulfill even at the very end of their life, and that is amazing and exciting, and that's just, thank you for that.
Thank you, Sensei. Absolutely in our society, there is a hyperfixation on youth. All the media is about high schoolers and younger people, and every product that is sort of advertised always seems to have this angle of how to make yourself seem more youthful. Like, just we really are hyper fixated on that specific period of life for whatever reason, and Sangatsu came in blasting down the walls and was like, hey, it doesn't matter how old you are, even when there isn't a single dark hair left on your head, you can still live a vibrant life. That does not end once you reach 30, once you reach 40. Your entire life is, like, to a degree up to your control, and it can be just as exciting and full of, like you said, like, conflict and desires, ambitions, goals at any stage. And that, thank you, that is so wonderful. But yes, old men, Grandpa Kawamoto, Hina's bullying arc. How are we gonna do this? I think we could just go into that part, because there are other older characters that I'd like to highlight at some point, but Hina's bullying arc deserves a whole it deserves a big discussion between us. We have a lot to say about it.
I would say yes, but if you look at the time, we're 40 minutes in. We're talking about old men. So I would say if you want to, we can definitely try and wrap up our old man discussion.
Okay.
And then go into the main characters next time.
You know what? The release,
so funny.
The release of this might actually be like, we recorded this one first, but the next episode would probably make sense as the first one. Well, who knows? We'll see. But other characters I wanted to highlight, Hayashida Sensei, who is sort of Rei's homeroom teacher. He's quite reoccurring, and basically he's this fairly young adult trying to live in this real world, this real harsh world, and he is full of knowledge and experiences that in large part is kind of also formed by his regrets about what he could have done. The regrets that stem from him having been lazy as an adolescent, and now he's just trying to do the best that he can and the best at what he's doing. And I don't know, there's something really poignant about that, because when I think about all the things I did and didn't do at an earlier time in my life, and which might be mixed in with this pang of jealousy you feel when you see your more successful peers, it's easy to get wistful, and he absolutely depicts that perspective. Yet what is so amazing through all of that is, in the end, he's chosen kindness and patience and being supportive of glowing lights like Rei. He wants to protect someone like Rei, so he to ensure that he can keep shining brighter and brighter. Like, there is this sort of recurring joke that he's kind of jealous at how amazing Rei is. Like, you're 17 and you make a bigger salary than me, and it's just like, but above that, he's chosen to be the bigger person. Like, he recognizes the regret he carries on, which can't be so easily reconciled given where he is in his life. But what is he to me? I think kind of like a depiction of an imperfect adult who's just trying his best. And that isn't anything revolutionary, but it still makes me emo.
It is in its own way, especially for whatever you would call the genre, not really the scope of anime. It's very rare to get that adult perspective. I really valued how he was willing to step up and be another mentor figure for Rei, or even not even just a mentor, but kind of fatherly. I wouldn't say that there's any particular male figure for Rei that acts as a proper father to him, but there's sort of an amalgamation of it between him, between Grandpa Kawamoto, between Shimada, that they are really able to uplift Rei from an adult male perspective that he desperately needs. He needs their support because he can't get it from his adoptive father, who has effectively ruined him.
Oh yeah, if we wanted to make
with
this
peace and love,
if we wanted to make this the old man episode, we can talk about not great old men as well, such as Rei's adoptive father. And this is, harkening back to what I was saying earlier as well, that there sure is a variety of perspectives when it comes to this age group and demographic. What Rei, it is very heartbreaking that he is not able to have a long-term traditional father figure in his life, but what he lacks in that area, you're right, it is sort of made up by different mentorship relationships that he has that kind of create each their own little puzzle pieces that together form a really supportive and wonderful, uplifting community. But
right. I think Chica Umino, I think there is a word that was used in attribution into her works, that she likes to figure out a family constellation for atypical family figures. And I feel as though that works very well in the context of Sangatsu, and especially for all of these adult men in Rei's life who who may have negative influences, who may have positive influences, but they all sort of act as this pseudo family, or not even pseudo. I mean, they can be his family in some respects, and I just really appreciate that. It feels very new. It feels very unique, and it makes me want to seek out my own family constellation. You know, it doesn't have to be just biological. I want to seek out those mentors, and I want to seek out people who can uplift me just in the same way that Ray was uplifted.
Family constellation might be one of my favorite new terms that I've learned recently. That is so charming, Lisa. I'm stealing that and definitely using that as a more flowery way to say found family. But you are absolutely on the dot. Like, Umino sensei, it's not that she denounces biological family. Like, once we get to the Kawamotos, which will also just be 40% me and Lisa sobbing, there is so much power in relationships that do involve blood, but a big part that defines Sangatsu, you're right, is the ability in one's life to seek out really genuine and just as powerful relationships similar to the family might have been born to, but that actually have no relation to you. And that in itself is still family that can be just as fruitful and empowering as any other sort of bond. And for someone like Rei, who has, you know, the unfortunate anime protagonist backstory of I've lost both of my parents, and then entering the adoptive family landscape but still struggling a lot, it shows such a aspect of hope and wonder that I think is so I appreciate so much. And you know, actually I'm thinking about I wanted to say, oh, the bad older characters, Rei's adoptive father. I'm thinking about it and I realize I don't actually have that much to say about him, Lisa. Like, he's just...
I think there's a little bit that you could say. I mean, he has this sort of... Does this actually happen? Where people adopt a child because they have some kind of prodigy aspect and then neglect their own family? I'm not sure. Maybe I'm sure it's a narrative that might have happened, but it is a little bit difficult to find stuff to say about him because we aren't as often granted his perspective, and when we are, it's sort of flimsy. I feel as though you know, that's something that could definitely be worked on. He does seem to have like these measures of regret. He doesn't seem like a horrible person inherently, but there's the damage that he's done to Rei, that he's done to his own family, it's hard to excuse, but also at the same time you wonder if he was even cognizant as to what he was even doing.
Or, you know...
Maybe that story of favoritism is actually quite common, it's just the circumstances that are kind of unique.
Yes, you're right. And this would not be to excuse any of his actions, because I'm very much of the camp that I do also believe he's not a bad person, but he's made irrevocable... Big word. Why did I choose such a big word? Irrevocable damage to both Rei and his own family. And contrary to what we've seen for the other characters, we haven't gotten like his backstory. And I wonder, should season 3, knock on wood, come, should we see that aspect, if we'll become a little more sympathetic to him, if we find out he went through maybe a similar thing growing up, if his own father had put comparative pressures on him as well.
Was he friends with Rei's family and his father? I think that was like a plot point, right?
Oh, right, yes.
That's how he came to be adopted.
Yes, he was... I guess he was shogi contemporaries with Rei's father. And am I making this up? Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't it kind of portrayed that Rei's father was always better than him at shogi? So is this...
Yes, I believe that was the case.
So is this his own, whether it was intentional or not, sort of reclamation, like, oh, now he's my son. I could not beat your father, but now that I've adopted...
Actually, I have seen this narrative before.
Okay,
I have indeed seen this narrative. It was an Ace Attorney. That's so funny.
Good old Ace Attorney. But
I will say we still have two more old men to tackle.
yeah.
And that is Goto, and that is also Soya, who I'm not sure if he's old, but I think he is. He just looks young.
Soya, I think, is like actually older than Shimada, or he's like around Shimada's age, and that's another.
That is truly disturbing.
That's yet another kind of running joke of, oh, Shimada looks really bad for his age.
And Soya is like, he looks like he could be the same age as Rei.
Yeah.
Maybe like taller, but...
I know. Soya is just... I just wrote one line for him because I think I could just go off the top of my head to kind of describe this sort of really in-awe feeling I have of him. But he is humble yet terrifyingly powerful. And to have a figure like that who's kind of always floating in the background within the landscape of shogi was really interesting. And he's introduced very early on, but he doesn't really, we don't get into the meat of him until kind of like the second half of season 2. So his presence is always felt, but almost in like a ghost-like way. And when he starts to become more human to us, I found that I was still just as in awe of him, even if I started to understand him a bit more. And one thing we talked about, Lisa, was the interesting way that his deafness was portrayed. I think you and I both started having suspicions that might have been the case before it was revealed, but when we learned that about him, like, how did that make you feel? Like, what was your initial reaction?
It's an indescribable feeling that art gave me, and it's really difficult to convey because it kind of gave me goosebumps, and it immediately, it was such a shocking humanization of him, I think, is the thing, is that he has been depicted in such a mysterious, like, godlike way throughout the entire series, and suddenly he's humbled down into this human being who has this really awkward moment where he just gives this automated answer that doesn't really suit the interview's question towards him. And then he just, what does he do? Like, walk out with, like, wine on his jacket or something?
Yeah, well, you know, the secondhand embarrassment of that scene was palpable and is, again, another masterful indication of the producers and Umino's writing. When the wine is spilt on him, he doesn't flinch. It's almost like he didn't even realize that happened, which I thought was so odd, but very intriguing. And sort of a comment about what you said, I absolutely agree. I think one very defining aura of him that's always been portrayed is how he's untouchable. It's like he's not even on the same plane of existence as all of our other human characters. So right, when that aspect of him is revealed, he gets humanized in a way that's so 180, it shook me to my core. And I would like to be very clear, when we talk about humanization, it isn't in like a pitiful sense of, oh my gosh, he has a disability, like blah, 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 blah. That's not at all how it's portrayed, which again, I think is something so amazing that Umino Sensei was able to get across. It was more just showing like, this is his reality. This is like what his life has led up to and how he lives. I think hopefully in the future we'll see even more characterization and hopefully how he might actually feel. Because one thing I've always found intriguing and mysterious about him is the fact that he is, as dubbed by the other shogi players, a monster. His level of skill and godly talent is actually horrifying. He's like a silent beast, and yet we are not shown an aspect of him that has a similar characterization of burning passion, of this is the craft that I uphold more than anything else. It is the thing I care most about. I'm driven by this deep desire to make my mark in the world. He seems more to be characterized by an aspect of, these are just the cards I was dealt by fate. I am just this unspeakably naturally talented, yet I don't have even an ounce necessarily of the attachment all of these other shogi players have. And again, that is not depicted in a way where he's heartless and he looks down on other people. He really is just such a humble character, and I find that so intriguing for someone who is the most powerful in this entire industry.
I have two questions for you, Winnie, regarding Soya. One of which is, do you think Soya is coded as neurodivergent? And the second one being, I know that you described him as, you didn't view his disability as pitiable, but do you think maybe in the way Ray treated him in the episode where he was following him during the typhoon, was he a little bit infantilized? Do you feel like that was a flaw of maybe his depiction or not?
Ooh, Lisa coming in with the hard cues.
By bringing that up, I don't mean that that's what I think I don't think he is infantilized, but I did see that as a critique, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I actually, when I saw that specific arc of they following him around, I did start to get a bit of that feeling, and I was curious at that moment if other viewers had any similar feelings or suspicions or how they might have felt. So I'm actually glad you brought up these points. But to answer them in order, firstly, concerning his possibility of being neurodivergent, I can confidently say maybe. Which is perhaps an unsatisfactory answer.
Ray is frequently coded as or seen as neurodivergent. And Soya is very much sort of his foil. Am I using that term correctly?
There's actually been multiple comments, most notably by Shimada, where he is kind of gleaning that they are similar. They are similar people. Yes. Like both their paths having taken having been entering having entered the professional shogi world around the same age in middle school, I believe, and also their immense power and skill that is also characterized by a sense of isolation and loneliness is quite poignant. And in flashbacks, we hear Dae's monologues of whenever he passed by Soya, he was like overwhelmed by this silent but almost deadly aura of him. Deadly not in like a malicious way, but just like it felt like ice was passing by him. And so I say maybe because I also, like you, I'm completely cognizant of the way that other characters and also, of course, consciously Umino Sensei's treatment of their similarities, their comparisons, and putting them together, and they frequently being depicted as neurodivergent, I think in some ways translates to Soya's side as well. But I'm not as confident saying that the same way about Rei, because I think there's still so much we don't know about Soya yet. We haven't heard any monologues or thoughts that are originating from him the same way that we've gotten from Rei. We know Rei on such an intimate level because of everything we see is from his point of view, and he's frequently giving us his innermost conscience with those monologues. And unless we see a bit more of that with Soya, I don't know if it's fair to put that characterization yet or not. Although for fans who definitely relate to him in a way, or like feel that they've seen enough to say he is neurodivergent, that is absolutely correct in its own way, I think, as well. But just for me, I think I'd like to see more from him personally before I kind of develop my thoughts further. I think
if I were to hypothesize as to why Umino has set up Soya to be so similar to Rei, I think it's to maybe show a character like Rei, had he not experienced the same warmth of the Kawamoto family, or maybe if he hadn't had so many peers from his shogi world reach out to him, maybe that's the Rei of the future. in an alternate universe.
That sent a shiver down my spine.
That's just my epic anime theory.
Oh, Lisa coming in with the big brain thoughts. I think that is very likely, and if he is meant to be a metaphor for such a version of Day, I find it touches me in a bittersweet way that rather than instead of becoming evil or heartless or ruthless or something, he gives more of a feeling of just emptiness, which right is
I don't want to say lost. I think he has his own path where he's like dedicating himself strictly to shogi, but I don't know. Sorry to interrupt your thought.
No, not at all. Yeah, Soya's very intriguing. We've talked about him often, and I think we always come back to we're interested to see more about him because I think there's so much more that could be explored. And from the vantage point we are at now, that development could go one of a million ways. Really, it's like I feel like a fork in that path. And Soya is maybe an example of because we've talked so much about the motivations, especially for the older shogi players, of how much shogi is their life. You would think that the moral of the story is dedicate 110% of yourself to the craft, but actually the ending for so many of these characters' arcs is always the opposite, Lisa. It's always that yes, it consumes you and you need to have an obsessive passion for it, but what pays off in the end is still community and personal satisfaction. And like with Sakuchan, his ultimate joy is the other people feeling like they were part of that victory as well because they were upholding him. And with Soya, he is never depicted like that. Everyone just expects him to win, but no one is personally, it seems, cheering for him to win. And that's a huge difference, right? That's so, I don't know, that's very poignant. Like who if anyone is closely tied with Soya's life, who is part of his motivation to keep on going? Or is it just to hold on to the title he's had for eons at this point, it seems?
Even just remembering some of the visual metaphors, I know we were talking about the burning with Saku, but Soya is often attributed to snow or ice. I think there was an ending theme where it's just him walking in the snow, right? Am I misremembering?
No, I think that is actually shown like probably multiple times.
So if Rei is constantly surrounded by water, has this water motif of being by the river or being drowned by the water in the opening, then Soya would be sort of the next step of that, where he'd be sort of iced out, and it's like this gentle icy snow, but there's no warmth. And is there even passion in it for him anymore? I don't know. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Oh. So yeah.
Did we want to talk about Goto?
Did we? That is a good question.
Or an hour over, do we want to talk about Goto?
I mean, I kind of hate him. The end.
But he has a sympathetic backstory. His wife is dying from cancer and he's dating a 20-year-old.
Okay, no, we're not, because this episode is not about that, and you and I were actually unclear if we wanted to talk about Kyoko. I actually dislike Kyoko more than Goto. Yes, he does have a slightly sympathetic backstory. I am actually not... I have angers surrounding the way that he chooses to engage with Kyoko in this pseudo-romantic sort of thing, but I'm more angry at the way that he treated They. Like, you wronged my boy, and that means you've wronged me personally times 100, and I will come for you. I will find your address and I will hunt you down. But
we have had this discussion about Kyoko and Goto, and it's a little bit complicated, and I feel like
yeah,
it's almost like a losing battle to figure out like who is the worst person of the two. Because for me, like my initial instinct when we were having that conversation was like, well, Goto is the old guy.
yeah,
And Kyoko is the girl that's straight out of her teens and has like a lot of problems at home. So it's kind of difficult for me. It was difficult for me to be like, Kyoko is the worst person in that dynamic, right? But I also understand that we had a conversation where I didn't pick up on this at first, but there's sort of insinuated that Kyoko had sexually assaulted Rei. And I didn't I didn't recognize that initially, but their dynamic is really difficult to talk about because we don't really understand the specifics of their relationship. Even just between Kyoko and Rei, and then understanding Kyoko and Goto, and I don't even really understand why there's conflict between Goto and Rei. Like I understand, but I don't know the specifics of it, so it's kind of difficult. I also don't understand the conflict between maybe Kyoko's dad and Goto himself. Like it's kept vague for a reason, and I understand that.
yeah.
I think they're gonna expand on that later. It's just really difficult for me to reckon with the pairing in general. It's strange because I feel as though Goto, like later on in the series, he becomes a little bit more tolerable on screen, and he's a little bit more, I don't want to say friendly, but he's less of an antagonistic force.
Well, you know what he
Go ahead.
he is a kind of spectacular example of is someone who can be two things at once that contradict each other. Now that you brought that up, I'm like, actually there are significant discussions we can have about Goto as a character, even if you and I personally do not like him for obvious reasons. But one such moment that really stuck with me was later on in the series when Rei comments about the way that Goto treats his fellow shogi players and the shogi craft in general in a way that is actually kind of admirable and is deserving of Rei's respect. And he is monologuing that to us. It was something about like, okay, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think the exact specifics are that important, but it was something like Goto coming into a sort of little cozy room where the shogi players are in the shogi hall sometimes when they're watching a match on screen or something like that, and somebody was bad-mouthing another shogi player or something, or being, I don't know, kind of like a chirpy bird about something, I don't know, something along those lines, and Goto kind of came in and put his foot down and was like, you know, to be a respectful shogi player, you should not be talking about other people like that or engaging in such kind of frivolous and petty activity. And they, at that moment, is relaying to the audience, wait a second, that I'm so amazed and confused at this moment because what I'm recognizing objectively is behavior that I respect, that I actually support. And how is it possible that is coming from a man that I so deeply abhor, that I detest in ways that words can't even describe? And what was quite amazing at that moment is the duality of adding complexity to Goto's character and characterizing him in a more sympathetic way where he's not so one note as just, like a grooming, like older guy. And Rei's reconciling that as you get older and experience more of the world, few things are black and white. There are contradictions that exist, and it's up to you to decide like how you're going to deal with that, because the contradictions aren't going away.
Ironically, many of those scenes are literally depicted in black and white. Yeah, Goto is an interesting topic. It would be so easy for the show to depict him as sort of this lecherous old man who's messing with Rei's adoptive older sister, but yeah, he does have this certain integrity that it's difficult to rail against him when you see that. And really, that's how humans are, you know, like he can't just be this one note character. Like Umi no Sensei just wouldn't allow that.
Yeah, and this might not
So
be the best example, but I'm like, oh, maybe this is Sangatsu's example of a really loving father who's just a great man in his personal life by all means, and is also very racist. And like somehow those people do exist, and you're like, well, how do I
Asian diasporic dads be like,
oof, ooh, hitting close to home. But other side thing, and of course, I'm not saying this to defend Goto more. It's just an observation. Yeah, I also appreciate that he's not depicted as a pervy, one-note older guy. It's interesting to note that much of what we see on screen concerning him and Kyoko is often him trying to reject her, trying to push her away. And she's just not having it. She's like,
I don't know. Is that just like part of the game though? Like, I don't know.
No, yeah, no.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like, okay, I say that, and it's not. I having just said that, I would also like to clarify it is not coming from a place of 100% integrity and commitment. He does often push her away, and then we get the scene of like kind of comes back a little bit, and just he's half-hearting it, which is frustrating in its own way. Like it seems easier to judge him if he was more clear on which side he is, but he seems to be frequently floating somewhere in the middle. And I don't know, I guess one thing that really characterizes Goto in general is just grayness. Just being gray.
Right.
Like his hair.
I think the one thing that I would like to avoid when discussing the complexity of their relationship, Goto and Kyoko, is that I feel like she wants to play into this idea where she's the temptress and she's the one who's going to steal him away from his wife. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's still showing them in bed together, and he made that choice to be with her in those moments where his wife is in the hospital dying from cancer. So it's just like, I don't know, interesting relationship for sure. And I will also say that looking through Chica Umino's some of her interviews, she mentioned that she actually really likes Kyoko. She's excited to like go into her more, so I don't know.
Yeah, if there's anything to really wrap up sort of Goto and by adjacent relativity Kyoko, it's that it is complex, nuanced, hard to talk about. There are glaring cons and imperfections about both of them, but yeah, one thing I think we should never forget is even if Kyoko is a consenting adult, Goto is still a much older man, like twice her age, and he has a level of power and influence that cannot be compared to her, even if he makes choices.
He's the same age as her father. He's her father's friend.
Oh, no. No, I don't like that. I do not perceive it. I do not like it. I don't like their whole thing at all. But if Umino Sensei says that she really likes Kyoko, is excited about it, I am open to Sensei, opening my eyes more, okay. I guess.
Oh, I did want to, I wanted to mention this point, and it doesn't negate the idea that Kyoko may have assaulted Rei. I don't know how to describe. I'm sorry. I don't want to end up the episode like this, but this is just something that I remembered from her interviews, that she had mentioned that Rei does actually like Kyoko, and like under different circumstances they could be together, I think is what she said. And I was just sort of like confused, nodding like, okay, Sensei, like
okay,
I'm so confused.
Here's the thing that I wish were not true, but like is, I'm not surprised at all she said that. because
Me too.
when I was seeing, when the series was focusing more around Rei and Kyoko, none of that went over my head. I very much was like, yeah, I think Rei did and continues maybe in a more conflicted way like her, as not just an adoptive stepsister way. And he himself might not even be happy about that, but that is the truth. And
right. There's like
yeah.
weird, really weird romantic tension. Really weird. Not the type that I condone by any means, but I think it's there. They have
there.
Weird chemistry. It kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies, and I think it does add to Rei. In a beneficial way.
It adds to the complexity of his
because
character.
It makes him more complex.
Yes. Took the words right out of my mouth.
He's depressed, he's conflicted, and it contributes to that, and you understand why.
You know,
it's just it's difficult to morally justify. I really don't want to come off as like incest is cool.
No, absolutely not.
That's not how I
absolutely
feel.
not. Because I was just going to say, Lisa, you and I scream so much about stories that are kind of ruined for us when that is interjected. And I absolutely don't, in this sense, I don't like seeing it. I don't enjoy it. I'm not condoning it. And yet, specifically for today's character, I kind of dejectively sigh and go, I can see why that happened to you. That you feel a certain way, kind of given all the little clues we get. It's clear.
Right. And it totally makes sense that Kyoko goes into one problematic romantic relationship to another one.
That girl really needs therapy. Can we get a petition started? Like, honestly, if she could maybe go talk to a mental health professional, a lot of this could be avoided. But in a sort of larger sense in the anime's pacing, might be another reason why you and I love season 2 so much, because Goto and Kyoko are like nowhere to be seen. And it is...
That is true. It is more Kawamoto family-centric and old man-centric, and I'm sorry. I know you really wanted to go into the Hina bullying arc, but I had noticed like 40 minutes in that we had like a lot to talk about still with the old man topic.
Old man.
And I do think it's like a funny episode that we focus so much on old men.
The next episode is going to be like what you would have expected from a Sangatsu no Ryan analysis episode. But instead, first you get this, which is just Winnie going, I simp over 80% of the old men in Sangatsu.
And I feel like it speaks to so much that we're both women, and we were still able to connect so deeply with these older male characters who are so distant from us in experience and in life, but they were still this compelling. And me and Winnie just went off on old men initially for our first Sangatsu episode.
If there's anything I want the audience to take, it is that one of the strongest merits of Sangatsu is its ability to make you relate and feel personally close to characters that in any other circumstance you would not have maybe given a second glance to. That is masterful storytelling and characterization. I'm constantly in awe of Umino's sensei and SHAFT's ability to produce such phenomenal content, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you thought that we were passionate about old men, once we get into the meat of the Kawamoto family and that's going to be a juicy episode.
Oh my gosh. I have never wanted to just live in this rustic old Japanese tiny living room with my feet under a kotatsu, being served like homemade meals and having like 5 cats assaulting me and trying to get food out of me. Kawamoto family. I cannot wait to get into that. Maybe next episode.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for tuning in this episode. Hopefully, even though there was a lot of chaotic energy at certain points, we were able to convey we were still able to convey the reasons why we enjoy this show so much. even when it gets to the points where we have complicated feelings about that, sometimes, you know, Sangatsu is not a series that veers away from letting the audience feel uncomfortable at times, but in a way I still think that has value in its own sense. So I don't know, it's Sangatsu no Line is amazing. Please go watch it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for listening in, and we're gonna keep talking about Sangatsu, so stay tuned for that as well. And please consider supporting this podcast wherever it may be posted. Thank you guys.
Thank you, and we'll talk to you guys next time. Bye bye.